Hi, good evening. Just want to call the meeting to order for the Oxnard Finance and Governance Committee for June 24th, 2025. Madam Clerk, may we have the roll call and posting of the agenda, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Chair MacArthur.
Here.
Committee Member Rodriguez.
Present.
Committee Member Starr.
Here.
The agenda for this meeting was posted in the kiosk at City Hall, the Oxnard Public Library, the City Administrative Offices, and on the city's website on Tuesday, June 17th. Thank you.
Thank you. May everyone stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Just repeat after me. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll go to the first item on the agenda. This is for items not in the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any public speakers for this item?
Chair MacArthur and committee members, we do not have any public speakers in person or virtually for items not on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the first item on the agenda. This is item D1. Actually, let me back up a little bit. C1. Yeah. Thank you. This is the approval of the minutes for the June 10th, 2025 Finance and Governance Committee meeting. Any members have any questions or comments on this?
They're excellent.
Sorry. Jim Levy, I just want to make sure, is this the same action just for the housing authority that took place for the city like a couple of sessions ago? You know what I mean? Like a couple of meetings ago, you transferred the intent was to transfer the investment authority to the CFO, just for the city. So
no, this is, if you want to take a look at what's on the agenda, I don't think it's the same as what you're referencing.
I'm sorry.
No problem. Madam Clerk, any public speakers for the consent agenda item?
Chair MacArthur and committee members, we do not have any public speakers in person or virtually for items not on the agenda. I mean, for the information and consent agenda. My apologies.
If not, what's the pleasure on this item?
No, I reviewed the minutes and I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Wonderful. We have a first and a second. Call for the vote.
Committee Member Rodriguez.
Aye.
Committee Member Starr.
Yes.
Chair MacArthur.
Yes.
And this motion carries 3-0. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to item D1 from the Housing Department. Policy Portfolio Guidelines and Investment Delegation for the Housing Authority for the City of Oxnard. Thank you so much. The recommendation that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend that the Board of Commissioners of the Housing Authority of the City of Oxnard adopt a resolution approving an investment policy and investment portfolio guidelines for the Housing Authority of the City of Oxnard and delegating investment authority to the Housing Finance Officer for fiscal year 2025 and 26. And Ms. Brenda Lopez, the Interim Housing Director, is here. Should we have any questions on staff on this item? And before it looks like, do you want to get into questions of staff on this item? We'll hear from the public speaker first.
I'd like to hear from the public speaker first.
Yeah. We have one, it sounds like, Madam Clerk. Okay. Jim, come on up. Thank you for your patience.
No, sorry. I
it's
don't
okay.
know what I was doing. Actually, I just had a couple of questions answered by Ms. Golden. Okay, so it is the housing authority equivalent of what happened a couple of sessions. I just wanted to clarify that. And the only things I have to say is I'm just going to repeat. I'm not mad. I'm just saying this was an election. You know, they're transferring the duties from a duly elected guy who got 97% of the vote. That's what I'm saying. And there's ramifications for that. And also, the other thing is transferring the duties to the CFO's office, where all the responsibility for the investment function will be under one shop. You know, the actual investing, who's going to pay for it, you know, the staff who's going to record it, they're all under the CFO's authority. and that's less than desirable. I'll put it that way. So I like the idea of an independent city treasurer, whether he or she is elected or appointed. So I know what you're doing here, but if this is a temporary solution, that's fine. But I don't, in the long run, I'm not so sure. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, for your comments. Thank you. Just confirming no other public speakers on this item before we move to questions.
Chair MacArthur, that is correct. We do not have any additional speakers in person or virtually for this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we'll open it up for questions. We'll start with you, Councilmember Starr. Go ahead.
Thanks, Ms. Lopez. First of all, I want to say I really appreciate that you provide a red line version of the changes. That helps me understand it a lot better. My understanding is that the housing finance officer is different from the chief financial officer because it's a different agency. Is that right?
Brenda Lopez, interim housing director. Yes, that is correct.
So, and who would the housing finance officer be?
Her name? Rhonda Hodge.
Okay, great. And I have a question about...
And she's right there, Mr. Starr, right here.
Oh,
she is.
Hi, how are you? So I have a question about at least one of the changes. So I noted on page 16, there's a section 3.1, and it's concerning the distinction between a prudent person standard and a prudent investor standard. And my understanding is that the prudent person rule basically focuses on the prudence of each individual investment, while the prudent investor rule focuses on the prudence of the overall portfolio strategy. So the latter allows for more risky investments than otherwise we'd have. And I was wondering if you or somebody else could expand upon the thinking here, why we're going down this road where we're allowing more risky investments.
That is correct. So what we did is on this investment policy, we recommended changes to update the policies. In this case, what we did, we actually reviewed probably about at least 7 other housing authorities to take a look at their investment policy as a best practice, including California government section codes that rule Department of Housing and Urban Development, and any regulations that have changed throughout the years. Specifically on this definition, the California Code section actually states that for the housing authorities, it would read investor versus person. So you are correct, it's a little bit riskier, if you will, but all of our funds are in LAIF. We don't intend to move away from that. That's what we recommend. But again, it was only to actually align with what we saw now updated on the codes.
Right. I got the impression that whether we call it the prudent person or the prudent investor standard, that the scope of your, or the universe rather, of your investment options are still pretty restricted, as I understand. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So Department of Housing and Urban Development spells out what we can invest for how long, but also internally, especially with the climate and our administration, we got to make sure everything's as liquid as possible. That's as much as we would like to yield, we're really looking at, should something happen where we need to pull the reserves, they need to be available, readily available. So that's correct. We are very conservative.
Great. And I was just wondering if it would be possible for the housing finance officer to kind of introduce herself and maybe talk about her background, if that would be okay?
She's a bit shy, but she'll come up.
Okay.
And Mr. Starr, or Councilman Member Starr on the committee, I just want to point out that the government code does subject, whether it's the legislative body or persons handling investments, that they are subject to the prudent investor standard. Okay. So that is the term used in the statute by the state legislature.
Okay. Hi,
I'm Rhonda Hodge, and I've been working for the city since 2006. I started out as a public housing staff accountant, and then I became the management accountant / auditor, and then I became the chief financial officer.
Okay. And so you're the one that's going to you'll be mostly selecting what investments we invest in. I understand it's mostly in LAIF right now, but
Yes, and basically, pretty much all we do is deposit into the LAIF account, and if we need the money, we can quickly withdraw from the LAIF.
and you're pretty comfortable with what our investment policy is, at least as proposed, and also the types of investments we're doing?
Yes, I am.
Okay, all right. I think that really answers all my questions. I do think that I did notice that normally the authority is with the legislative body, or it could be given to the treasurer. It seems like there's other statutes that allow us to also redirect that to a different officer.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And just to reiterate that the Housing Authority is a separate legal entity with its own designated treasurer by the board. That is not the city treasurer.
And my understanding is that the treasurer would be, and I think this treasurer and the secretary would be Mr. Newwood. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Just one question, Ms. Lopez. In your research, how do other housing authorities operate when it comes to this type of action?
Sure. What I noticed, most of the policies are very similar. I think most housing authorities, because we're usually on a smaller scale, we visit with each other, we have meetings, and we say, hey, this policy came out, what are best practices? So most of the policies look very similar. Some need updates. Some, because it's not required to have a policy, don't have one. And the niche that we are in is that most housing authorities are independent. In our case, we have our board also sitting on the council. That makes it a little bit different in requirements. But overall, very similar. Of course, the larger PHAs are actually investing. They have brokers, but we don't have that kind of funding available.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ms. Lopez. Any other questions? No,
No, I didn't have questions. I appreciate the redlining.
yeah, I do too. I move the recommended action as proposed.
I would second that. I feel pretty comfortable with this.
Wonderful. Madam Clerk, call for the vote.
Committee Member Starr,
Yes.
Chair MacArthur,
Yes.
Committee Member Rodriguez,
Aye.
and this motion carries 3-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now move to the next item in the agenda. This is item D2 from the Finance Department, subject authorizing the issuance of 2025 wastewater revenue refunding bonds. The recommendation that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend that the City Council, 1, adopt a resolution approving and authorizing issuance of 2025 wastewater revenue refunding bonds in an amount not to exceed $55 million, and 2, authorizing the execution and delivery of other documents required in connection therewith, and lastly, 3, authorizing the taking of all other actions necessary to the consummation of the transaction contemplated by the resolution. And Mr. Javier Chagoyan Lázaro is here to answer any questions. And we do have one speaker on this item. Jim, do you want to speak on this item as well before we get into a discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest actually that since there's a presentation that's being given.
You want to make that first?
Might want to make the presentation first, because maybe there'll be questions that Mr. Lavery will have as a result of that.
Jim, do you want
Do
to,
it either way. I got questions, but I'll
do you want to wait for the we'll just wait for the presentation, Jim, if that's okay. Okay, thank you. Okay. We have the consultant here as well. Okay.
Good afternoon, Javier Chagoyan Lázaro, Chief Financial Officer with the City of Oxnard, and I would like to introduce our consultants from NHA, Greg Hill and Christian Spronger, that will do the presentation and will be available to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. All right, good afternoon, committee members, city staff, members of the public. My name is Christian Sprunger. I'm a vice president with NHA Advisors. We're the city's municipal financial advisor. Today, I'll be speaking with you regarding a refunding of the outstanding 2014 wastewater bonds. I'm joined today by my colleague, Craig Hill, and we'll jump into the presentation. This slide summarizes the financing team that the city will use to issue the 2025 bonds to refund the outstanding 2014 bonds. As you can see, there's a municipal advisor, there's bond and disclosure counsel, those are the lawyers. There's a trustee for the bonds, and then there will be an underwriter. To provide a little bit of background, the city has 3 outstanding wastewater fund obligations. Those are summarized there in the table to the right. The 2014 bonds, the first column there, those are the ones we're talking about refinancing today. The outstanding interest rate on those bonds is 5%. You can see the outstanding par is $51.7 million rounded. Based on the debt service schedules for these 3 obligations, the total aggregate debt service for the wastewater fund is expected to increase from approximately $9.4 million currently to about $12.8 million in fiscal year 29, once repayment begins on the 2021 SRF loan. The 2014 wastewater bonds are currently callable with no penalty. In the current market, we estimate that a refunding of the 2014 bonds would save the city and the ratepayers approximately $375,000 per year. This savings equates to about 5.5% net present value savings. The city's debt management policy identifies a minimum savings threshold test for any refunding of 3% net present value savings. And what that means is, net of any costs of issuance, the city has to net 3% savings. In this particular scenario for this 2014 bond, that 3% test would result in $200,000 of annual savings based on about a 4% true interest cost on the refunding bonds. The structure of the 2014 bonds is shown in the graph with the orange line. As you can see, it's structured for level debt service, matures in fiscal year 34. The graph also shows the estimated debt service on the refunding 2025 bonds with the blue columns there. As you can see, it's really a vanilla refinancing, which means no change to the outstanding term, same structure level. All we're doing is basically swapping the prior interest rate with a lower interest rate. The new debt, the 2025 bonds, would have a fixed interest rate. So just like the outstanding 2014 bonds, fixed rate debt, same final maturity. Expected par on the 2025 refinancing is approximately $50 million in the current market, but we are in the staff report and in the draft resolution, there is a not to exceed of $55 million. That's to give a little bit of flexibility to optimize on the day of sale with a premium versus discount structure. This slide summarizes the key documents that will be prepared and presented to council at a later date. You can see there's an authorizing resolution, identifies not to exceed parameters, authorizes city staff to proceed with a refinancing, provided that the refinancing is within those not to exceed parameters. There'd be an indenture of trust, and that's the key document that outlines the covenants and the terms of the bonds. It also has the rate covenant in there, which is one of the key covenants on any revenue bond. There's an escrow agreement related to the outstanding repayment and payoff of the outstanding debt. It's really an administrative agreement. The preliminary official statement, that is the primary disclosure document that outlines the key material facts about the operations and finances of the wastewater fund. So that is the primary disclosure document that investors would review when deciding whether to purchase the 2025 bonds. The CDC, or the Continuing Disclosure Certificate, is appended to the back of that, and it's a covenant to provide investors with ongoing disclosures on an annual basis, and if a significant event were to occur. The agreement would be materially the same as the city's outstanding obligations for its outstanding 2014 and 2018 wastewater bonds. Finally, the bond purchase agreement, that's the covenant or the contract between the underwriter and the city, where the underwriter buys the bonds from the city and resells them to the public. Schedule before you. After tonight's meeting, we are working on drafting legal documents and going through a credit rating process. The plan is to bring back the item to council in July. And then following that, we would be in a position to go into the market and sell the bonds and then close sometime likely in August. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, Jim, we'll go to you first before we get into questions.
Okay, I guess, well, like the gentleman said, he said it's vanilla. We used to say plain vanilla. This is a no-brainer that you have to approve this if you're going to save $375,000 a year. He's being very conservative with his assumptions, I think. So it seems like this is a good, I mean, I can't think of one objection. The only issue, not an issue I had, but a question is, I couldn't find anything. He mentioned there's a state revolving fund loan, some board, and I couldn't find anything in the CAFRA the last 2 years about what are the conditions of that loan. You know, it says in here it's going to go up to $80 million. There's going to be a drawdown of $80 million, and then there's a payment for 30 years of $3.4 million each year. So it's a level debt service payment. And I was wondering where are those numbers coming from? What's the source document for those numbers? And also, what criteria did a city have to fulfill to qualify for that state loan instead of going through the traditional municipal bond financing? There's two other bonds, 2014, 2018. Now, I'm assuming there's a term using bond finance called parity. So that means, like, who's getting paid first? So I'm a little concerned about, does the state loan affect the rating of the 2014 and 2018 bonds? Because of this additional debt. It's an additional debt for the city. I'm pretty sure the 2014 bonds will get paid first. But I'm a little concerned, not that there's anything wrong, of course, there's just not an explanation as to anything about this loan. I couldn't find it in the CAFRA, you know. And also, when he showed a slide with for the debt service ballooned for 6 years by $3.4 million, and I was wondering, does the city have what's called a coverage ratio that backs that up, that shows that the city has the funds to finance those 6 years? You know, because that's a pretty substantial increase. So things like that. And this is because I did this. This is part of my responsibility. That's why I'm asking. I'm not trying to get anybody. I'm not trying to, hurt anything. And the other thing is, the last thing is, who's getting paid, how much, and how much. For some reason, you mentioned what the S&P is getting paid. But there's a lot of money getting paid. And you got to know that. I mean, the underwriters, they take the risk. They get paid the most, usually. These guys get paid the most. I mean, they're not the most. They get paid. Counsel gets paid, the underwriters counsel, your bond counsel, the fiscal agent. There's a lot of money going out the door. I mean, that's all paid at closing. You don't see it. It's all.
Thank you, Jim. Maybe when the consultant comes back up here, we'll have him address some of those questions you posed here just now. Are you able to answer some of those questions before we get into our own questions?
Oh, thank you so
much. I can address some of the questions and comments. The city has a state revolving fund loan for the wastewater program, up to $88 million and at a 0.9% interest rate. The city in the last fiscal year has not drawn any money for that SRF loan. That's why it's not showing in the last audited financial statement. This current fiscal year, 24-25, the city has done the first round of that revolving fund loan, and that round will be reflected on audited financial statements. I have to verify if the status of the SRF loan, if it's in parity with existing bonds or is subordinate. The state revolving fund loans is basically the city council is similar to issuing bonds, has to go through a specific process. The city first has to apply to the state for any funds that are available when the state opens the funding for those projects. And there's almost like a competitive list of projects that different criteria that the state is going to basically provide certain rating, and because there's limited funding, they use that rating to assign the funding for those projects. And that's one part of the process. And through that process, it requires city council approval to basically to submit those type of projects, the applications. And once you finally get awarded by the state, you still have to come back to city council and basically just formalize all the documents and agreements related to that specific loan. One of the things that make this type of financing, the state revolving fund loans, so attractive for local governments, special districts, is that way below market, because they use the state of California market power to get a lower interest rate for the participants. You also have and you don't have to start reimbursing the loan until 1 year after completion of the project that's being financed. So that's another benefit for this type of financing. It's definitely much more affordable. The amount of financing through this method, through the state revolving fund loans, is definitely limited to what the funds that are available through the different programs at the state level, because they have different programs for water, wastewater, recycled water. So, and there's a very competitive environment to have access to that type of funding.
Thank you.
There was also the question that Mr. Lavery had on the debt coverage ratio. I guess his concern would be, and I think it'd be valid, that come 2029, when the loan payments come up on the SRF loan, that maybe we wouldn't meet the debt coverage ratio and would have to raise rates in order to actually take care of that. Is that what's your understanding of the debt coverage ratio anticipated in 2029 when total debt service goes up to almost 13 million?
So the debt coverage ratio will have to be calculated for all the debt that is outstanding at that moment, for all the debt service. And depending on the covenants, and I don't have all that information, usually you have to calculate a covenant ratio for your senior debt, and then calculate the coverage ratio for your subordinate debt, and also have a coverage ratio for your total combined both senior and subordinate debt. And the obligation is to meet your total debt coverage ratio, has to meet that coverage ratio, the most stringent of all the debt coverage ratio for all the different issues that the city may have.
If you could follow up, obviously you can't do this on the spot, but if you could follow up with that actual information for a later meeting, or that would be helpful. I just don't want us to be blindsided with, we need to increase rates in 2029 and we don't know it today. Maybe that's not an issue at all right now.
Well, no, maybe that's something that could be presented when it comes to council on the July 15th.
That would make sense. Yeah, if you could do that on July 15th, that'd be awesome.
Mr. Chairman, I think Jim also asked about the 2014 bonds, if they were going to be paid first, is what he asked as well.
So the seniority?
Is that?
That's what
the seniority, is that what you were talking about?
So what the action that is in front of this finance committee is basically issue bonds to repay in full the 2014 bonds.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. I was wondering if Mr. Sprunger wants to expand upon what was just said.
All of the outstanding debt is parity debt. So the 2014-18 SRF loan are at a parity basis. They all have an equal pledge on net revenues of the wastewater fund. So there's no priority between those three.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
And the same would apply to the 2025 refunding bonds. It'd just basically swap out the 14 bonds with the 2025 bonds, but it'd be parity debt.
Okay. So I do have some questions. So I assume we're only attempting to refund the 2014 bonds because those are the only bonds that are callable at present. Is that right?
That is correct.
Do you know whether those 2014 bonds, were they callable from inception, or was it several years later before they could be called?
They had a standard 10-year par call on them, so they were not callable for 10 years, and they're callable as of now.
And for these replacement bonds, is there going to be a call function associated with that?
The replacement bonds will mature in 2034, so less than 10 years. The market standard is for a 10-year par call. Okay. If the desire, Our standard recommendation would be not to have a call provision on those because you would pay.
You have to pay extra interest.
Yeah, you'd have to pay extra in interest rate to have that provision, and the likelihood of calling it would be very low.
Right. And when you came up with the net present value calculation, was that based on the 5%? Was it a discount rate of 5%? Was it based on the anticipated rate of the replacement bonds, or was there some other rate of discount that you used to get to the savings calculation?
Yeah. The staff report presents two savings numbers. The 3% NPV is what aligns with the city's policy, and in this specific scenario, that would mean a 4% interest rate on the refunding. I also presented in the staff report, or the staff report also presents a current market savings, which is the $375,000 annual savings. Mm-hmm. That equates to about a 3.52% interest rate, and that's the market true interest cost of the debt. Right,
and I guess the lower the discount rate, the more the savings would be, the net present value savings would be, correct?
Yes, the lower the interest rate on the debt, the more savings there would be.
Okay. And so we anticipate these 2014 bonds would be refunded in August based on where we are?
I believe that's an appropriate timing based on where we're at in the process.
I mean, right now, my position pretty much is that I'm inclined to support this because it's an existing bond. It's just being refinanced at a lower rate. The only thing that kind of gives me a little bit of pause here is allowing us to actually increase the amount to 55 million. I just come from a standard of I never want to go further into debt without voters approving it. So I'm wondering how necessary is the $55 million figure? Would you be able to live with something a little bit lower, closer to what the actual outstanding amount is today?
I believe in the current market, in today's market, there is a likelihood that investors would offer a premium for the bonds, which would mean we'd issue less than the outstanding par to refund them. Okay. But there's also the risk that if we put the reason why when we come to council and committee with a not to exceed amount that's more than the outstanding par is to provide that flexibility in case the market shifts in the week we price or if investor demand shifts. The only reason you would issue more par than outstanding is if you can get a lower interest rate. So more debt at a lower interest rate versus less debt at a higher interest rate, there would be a net benefit in order to go with that.
So is this based on the value of the bonds being higher than par? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. The price of the bonds would be higher than the par.
Okay.
In a premium scenario. In a discount scenario, then the price would be lower than the par, and so we'd issue more bonds to.
Got it. So basically what would end up happening is, I guess when I'm looking at ultimately what we'd pay at maturity, assuming it all had come to maturity at once. What is that dollar value going to be versus what we're currently in debt for? So.
The number 55 it's the current plus 10%. It's a standard request as far as the size. If it's the desire of council to go with a lower not to exceed, then that would be that's the direction. But
sure. Yeah, I wouldn't mind hearing from staff a little bit on that, what their thoughts are on this. I mean, maybe it's just based on your recommendation, but maybe.
How do they arrive to the 55,000?
Yeah, 55 million yeah. instead of 52, which is where we're at.
Sure. Mr. Lázaro, go ahead.
The sales of any bonds, it goes through it's a very dynamic transaction. It depends. It's like supply and demand transactions, and I think it's important to have the flexibility to take the opportunity of what's happening in the market. If we reduce or limit that flexibility, we may end up with a more disadvantaged transaction at the end of the day. And I think what we're trying to propose here is just to give us that opportunity to get the best deal for the city at this moment.
Right. So, I mean, right now we're anticipating it's going to be 3.5%, but who knows what the rates are going to be at that date that comes up. Just for my education, how difficult is it for you to simply adjust the rate towards the very end in order to keep it close to par, as opposed to investors paying a premium for a slightly higher stated rate?
when we take the refunding bonds to market, when we work with the underwriter to take them to market, the underwriter is going to reach out to investors and is going to look at the benchmarks and get and propose a price. And so, it is when an issuer decides to say, okay, here's what the market's offering, but I want to go with a slightly lower par, meaning I want to have a slightly higher premium, then they would be making a decision to essentially take a structure that the market isn't offering as optimal. There would be a potential cost there to do that.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Kind of. So I understand the role of the underwriter. Basically, you're taking on all the exposure that maybe the bonds don't get sold. So you're buying it all up front to be immediately resold. Is there much of a premium that gets charged on the resale? I mean, how close does it get between what the money we would get versus, let's say, the money that the underwriter gets when they resell the bond out in the market?
Yeah, and just to be fully clear, we are the municipal advisor to the city, so we don't have any role in actually selling the bonds. We're not the underwriter. We have a fiduciary duty to the city as our client. But there is an underwriter discount that so it's their compensation for selling the bonds into the market. Usually it's less than 1%. In your case, the number that we put in the staff report estimates 0.75%. Could even be lower, depending on what bids we get.
Right, and after this whole thing is done, how do we as a council examine it after the fact and say, oh yeah, that worked out really well, we got the best deal we could? How do we analyze it after the fact?
Well, first of all, the deal should, of course, stand up in light of the outstanding transaction on a comparative basis. How does it compare? I think your question, though, is more, how would you compare it to other comparable transactions pricing in the market?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, if I were to learn that we could have gotten a little bit more of a premium for the bond if someone else was underwriting it, that would be amazing if we could know that. I don't even know if that's even possible to know that, but I don't know how one decides that an underwriter is really good at what they do and is going to make it so that virtually all the money winds up in our pockets versus in the underwriter's pockets. So
as the city's advisor and as the city's fiduciary, our duty is to make sure that they are giving you a good deal. And so we're making a recommendation on the day of sale. We're looking at comparable transactions in the market and what their interest rates those comparable transactions are getting. And we're saying, is this deal that they're offering a good deal or no? And so we're making a recommendation on the day of sale based on.
And I assume that you get paid by us as opposed to by underwriters or anything like that?
That's correct. We are paid out of the transaction.
Okay. But it's a negotiated amount?
Correct.
Okay. And there's no, I assume that it wouldn't be lawful to do anything on the back end with the underwriters or what have you, right?
That is against SEC regulations.
That's what I would think. All right. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation. I'm inclined to support it and I think the flexibility is important as well. I know you had a question.
Oh, I was just to make sure that I understood what was being shared about the not to exceed $55 million versus $52 million for par. And some of this is a whole new world to me. But just because we have that flexibility doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to go up to the $55 million. Depending if it's a good deal, we have the ability to pull the trigger or not. So, okay, I just want to make sure we're on the same page on that, because I do support the recommended action.
Yeah, I make a motion to approve. I see this as a simple refinance, almost like we would do a house, for example, but. Right. I move the recommended action as proposed.
And I'll second.
Madam Clerk, call for the vote.
Chair MacArthur?
Yes.
Committee Member Rodriguez? Aye. Committee Member Starr?
Yeah, yes.
And this motion carries 3-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any future agenda items? If not, If there's no further business, no objections,
I was just wondering, do we have any, I guess I'll ask the city clerk this, do we have any future agenda items that are already planned based on previous requests? I'm just trying to remember what we might have on deck. Or if you don't know, that's okay.
Committee member Starr, off the top of my head, I don't have any information, but we can get back to you.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you again for the presentation. Thank you. And without objection, we're adjourned. Thank you.